November 1922. A tomb was opened. Days later, newspapers called it vengeance, and the world listened. For nearly a century, every sudden death tied to an Egyptian tomb fed a growing story. A story of retribution from beyond the grave. But where do fact and fear split? They whispered of curses that crossed continents, explorers who fell ill, rich men who died under strange circumstances. Lamps went out, dogs howled. A single phrase, cursed, turned archaeology into legend. But how many of those tales survived because they were true? And how many survived because they made a better story? Tonight, we open the past and count what's real, and what's only fear dressed in gold. We'll trace the moment the world first screamed curse, meet the names that haunted the headlines, and let science into the sealed rooms. Expect mystery, expect coincidence, expect surprises. Stay with me, because by the time we finish, you'll decide. Is the Pharaoh's curse real, or merely a story the world wanted to believe? To understand the so-called curse, we have to step back thousands of years into a world where life and death were two halves of the same journey. For the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't an end. It was a doorway, and the tomb was more than a grave. It was a sacred vessel to guide the soul into eternity. Walls were covered in spells from the Book of the Dead, painted with colors that still cling to stone after 3,000 years. Figures of Anubis, guardian of the afterlife, watched over the chamber. And sometimes, warnings were written for any who dared to enter uninvited. These weren't always curses in the way we think. They were protections, meant to keep robbers, and perhaps evil spirits, away from the resting place of a king. By the 19th century, tombs weren't only raided by thieves. Archaeologists, part explorers, part showmen, opened them for science and for spectacle. The West was hungry for relics, and Egypt became a stage. Many digs ignored local traditions. Tombs were stripped, mummies displayed to paying crowds. The idea of an ancient retribution waiting for intruders began to take hold, long before Tutankhamun's tomb was found. So when, in 1922, a tomb was opened that seemed untouched by time, the stage was already set. All it needed was one strange death, and the curse would leap from whispers to headlines. And that strange death came sooner than anyone expected. Late in 1922, beneath the hot light of the Valley of the Kings, an English team found a sealed doorway that hadn't seen daylight for millennia. Howard Carter, the archaeologist who had spent years searching, pried open the threshold and looked inside. When asked if he could see anything, he answered with two small words the world would never forget. Yes, wonderful things. The tomb, catalogued as nearly complete, produced a treasure trove of objects, gilded masks, chests, and a burial chamber layered in gold and color. Archaeology had found a global spectacle. The discovery immediately left the tents and entered the papers. The world read breathless dispatches. The public queued for every new report. Then, only months later, the tomb's financier, Lord Carnarvon, the very man who bankrolled the excavation, died unexpectedly. Newspapers smelled a story. The Pharaoh's curse, some headlines declared. Soon, every untimely illness or sudden death of someone connected to the excavation fed a narrative. Reporters quoted ominous-sounding translations. Rumors grew. Inscriptions, ancient warnings, revenge from the grave. When the headlines named a curse, they also named victims, a short list that the press fed into lore. The loudest example was Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy patron who funded the dig. He fell ill after a mosquito bite, developed an infection, and died in Cairo. The press called it mysterious. Doctors called it septicemia. A medical tragedy, not necessarily a supernatural reckoning. Meanwhile, the man who led the excavation, Howard Carter, lived on for years, continuing his work and dying decades later. Many involved in the tomb's discovery suffered no sudden fates at all. Newspapers stitched together a long list of deaths from around the world, financiers, journalists, even a few distant acquaintances. But journalists often stretched the link, a vacationing relative, a financier who happened to die in the same year, all lumped into a single spooky narrative. So, what better explanations exist? First, ordinary medical causes, infections, pneumonia, and the limits of 1920s medicine. Second, coincidence and selection bias. Given enough people connected to a famous event, some will die soon after by chance. Third, environmental hypotheses. Tombs can host molds and bacteria. Opening a sealed chamber can release spores that irritate or sicken those with weak immune systems. Stories amplify. We remember the rare and dramatic. A single dramatic death becomes a pattern. Once news editors, novelists, and filmmakers prefer the spooky angle. The press printed eerie translations, occultists added fuel, and movies locked the image in public memory. Researchers who followed the trail later found a mixed picture. Some deaths directly connected to the dig had clear medical explanations. Others were tenuous links at best. Crucially, thousands of people associated with Egyptology lived ordinary lives. The curse list is a cherry-picked fragment. We've seen names and headlines. Next, we'll call in science, lab tests, microbiology, and statistics, and see which explanations hold up under scrutiny. Let's pull on the thread of evidence, from microbes to math, and see which explanations hold water. One plausible idea. Sealed tombs can harbor molds, bacteria, and spores. When chambers are opened after centuries, microscopic particles can be stirred into the air, a hazard for the elderly or anyone with a weak immune system. Remember the 1920s. Antibiotics were not yet in common use. Simple infections could become deadly. A mosquito bite, a cut, or pneumonia that today we treat quickly could then turn fatal. The public wanted the curse. Storytellers supplied it. Modern researchers can test remains, check archives, and run environmental sampling. Those methods can confirm infections, toxins, or trace evidence, but they can't prove a supernatural cause. Science narrows possibilities. It rarely supplies dramatic certainties. Put together, natural causes, medical limits, coincidence, and human pattern-making explain most of the curse stories. Some claims remain unresolved, but unresolved is not the same as supernatural. So why has the myth refused to die? You've walked through the chambers of history, science, and myth. Now tell me, do you believe the curse of the Pharaoh was real, or just a story carved in sand? Let me know in the comments. Some mysteries never stay buried.